The dust of the main street in Silverstone Creek hung like a veil in the early morning light as Elizabeth Carter stepped off the eastbound stagecoach, her boots landing with a soft thud on Wyoming soil. The year was 1878, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston with nothing but a trunk of possessions, and a letter from her late father's business partner promising her a position as the town's new schoolteacher. Elizabeth straightened her travel-worn blue dress and adjusted her small hat, pinned precariously to her chestnut hair. At 23, she had left behind the familiar comforts of her childhood home after her father's sudden passing had revealed a mountain of debt that swallowed their family estate. The West represented not just a new beginning but her only option. Silverstone Creek, she whispered to herself, taking in the weathered storefronts and saloons that lined the street. Men in dusty clothes lounged on porches, eyeing her with curiosity while women hurried about their morning errands, casting sideways glances at the newcomer. The stagecoach driver tossed down her trunk. "That's all of it, madam. Good luck to you." He tipped his hat before climbing back onto his seat and snapping the reins, leaving Elizabeth alone in the unfamiliar town. She spotted the Silverstone Hotel across the street and decided to secure lodging before seeking out Mr. Peterson, her father's associate who had arranged her teaching position. As she stepped from the boardwalk into the muddy street, a group of men emerged from the saloon nearby. "Well, look what just rolled in on the morning stage," called one, a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache and bloodshot eyes. "Fresh meat for the picking." Elizabeth kept her eyes forward, quickening her pace. Her father had warned her about frontier towns, though she had convinced herself his concerns were exaggerated. Now she wasn't so sure. "Hey, fancy lady," another man called out. "Boston or Philadelphia, you got that Eastern look about you." She clutched her reticule closer to her body, ignoring them. The hotel was just 20 paces away. "I'm talking to you." The heavy-set man stepped into her path, reeking of whiskey and tobacco. "Don't they teach you manners back east?" "Please excuse me, sir," Elizabeth said firmly, trying to sidestep him. "Sir," he mocked, turning to his companions. "Hear that, boys? We got ourselves a real lady." He turned back to her, his expression darkening. "Ladies don't belong out here unless they're working on their backs." "You a working girl?" "I am the new schoolteacher," Elizabeth replied, lifting her chin. "And you are blocking my way." The man's face contorted with anger. "Schoolteacher, we don't need no fancy Eastern woman telling our children how to talk proper and filling their heads with nonsense." Before Elizabeth could respond, the man hawked and spat directly at her feet, some of the spittle landing on the hem of her dress. His friends laughed, emboldening him to step closer. "Go back east where you belong," he growled. "Your kind ain't welcome here." Elizabeth's cheeks burned with humiliation as passers-by stopped to watch. Her hand trembled around the handle of her reticule, but she refused to show fear. "That's quite enough, Hargrove." The voice was deep and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. The crowd parted as a tall figure approached on horseback. Elizabeth turned to see a man astride a magnificent chestnut stallion, his face partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. He wore a long duster coat, slightly open to reveal a star-shaped badge pinned to his vest. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He approached slowly, his hand resting casually near the holstered revolver on his hip. When he reached Elizabeth and her harasser, he removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and piercing blue eyes that studied the situation carefully. "Show some respect," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "This lady has traveled a long way to teach our children. Might do some of you good to sit in on her lessons." The crowd's nervous laughter died quickly under his steady gaze. "Ah, Wade, we was just having some fun," Hargrove muttered, suddenly finding the dirt beneath his boots fascinating. "Fun's over." The man called Wade replaced his hat and turned to Elizabeth. "Wade Dawson, madam, town marshal, welcome to Silverstone Creek." Elizabeth nodded, finding her voice. Elizabeth Carter, thank you for your intervention, Marshal. Miss Carter is expected, Marshal Dawson announced to the onlookers. Mr. Peterson arranged for her arrival weeks ago. Anyone who has a problem with our new schoolteacher will answer to me. His eyes lingered on Hargrove and his companions. Is that understood? The crowd murmured in assent, and people began to disperse. Hargrove shot Elizabeth a resentful look before slinking back toward the saloon. Wade Dawson picked up her trunk with ease. Allow me to escort you to the hotel, Miss Carter. Mrs. Wilson runs a clean, respectable establishment. She's been preparing for your arrival. That's very kind, Marshal Dawson, Elizabeth replied, falling into step beside him. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them as they crossed the street. Is it always so? Welcoming here, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Hargrove and his friends are the exception, not the rule. Most folks here are decent, hard-working people. They just need time to warm up to newcomers. And how long have you been the marshal here? She asked, curious about this man who had come to her defense. Going on 3 years now, he replied. Came here from Colorado Territory after the war. Silverstone was smaller then, but the railroad brought growth, and growth brings challenges. They reached the hotel where a plump, gray-haired woman hurried out to meet them. You must be Miss Carter. Oh my, look at you, pretty as a picture despite that dreadful journey. I'm Mrs. Wilson. She shot a knowing look at the marshal. I see you've already met our Wade. Marshal Dawson was kind enough to assist me after a rather unpleasant encounter, Elizabeth explained, Mrs. Wilson clucked her tongue. Hargrove and his rabble, I'd wager. Pay them no mind, dear. Come in, come in. Your room is all ready and I've prepared a bath. You must be exhausted. Wade set down Elizabeth's trunk in the hotel lobby. Mr. Peterson said to tell you he'll call on you tomorrow morning to show you the schoolhouse. It's been freshly painted for the new term. Thank you, Elizabeth said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after her journey. And thank you again for your timely intervention. He tipped his hat. Just doing my job, Miss Carter. Silverstone Creek might seem rough around the edges, but give it a chance. It has a way of surprising you. With that, he turned and left, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun. Mrs. Wilson watched him go with a fond smile. Finest man in the territory, that one. Never married, though plenty have tried to catch his eye. She winked at Elizabeth. Come along now, dear. Let's get you settled. As Elizabeth followed Mrs. Wilson upstairs, she found herself glancing back toward the door where Wade Dawson had disappeared. In a town that had already shown her both cruelty and kindness, she wondered what other surprises awaited her. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Elizabeth arrived early on her first day, her stomach fluttering with nerves as she arranged primers and chalk on the teacher's desk. Mr. Peterson, a kindly older gentleman who had been her father's friend in their university days, had shown her the building the previous day and introduced her to several town council members. Most families are eager for proper education, he had assured her, though you may find some resistance from certain quarters. The memory of her welcome to Silverstone Creek was still fresh in her mind as she smoothed her best dress, a modest navy blue with white trim. She had spent her first 2 days in town organizing the schoolhouse and preparing lessons, venturing out only for meals at the hotel dining room where Mrs. Wilson fussed over her delicate Eastern constitution. The sound of boots on the wooden steps made her turn. Marshal Dawson stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Good morning, Miss Carter. Hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Marshal, she replied, surprised by his visit. Is there something I can help you with? He stepped inside, glancing around the freshly arranged classroom. Just checking that everything's in order for your first day, and… He hesitated. Thought I should warn you that Hargrove's boy might give you some trouble, takes after his father in temperament. Elizabeth nodded, appreciating the warning. Thank you, I've dealt with difficult students before. I don't doubt it. He placed his hat on a desk, revealing hair the color of wheat, slightly too long and curling at the collar of his shirt. I also wanted to apologize for your welcome to our town. That's not who we are, at least not all of us. There's no need to apologize for others' behavior, Marshal Wade, he corrected her. Just Wade is fine when I'm not wearing the badge officially. Elizabeth felt a small smile forming. Very well, Wade, and you may call me Elizabeth when we're not in formal company. A commotion outside signaled the arrival of children. Wade quickly retrieved his hat. I'll leave you to your students, Miss Carter. Good luck today. Throughout that first morning, Elizabeth found herself thinking of the marshal's visit, even as she led 28 children of various ages through reading and arithmetic. Young Tommy Hargrove, a sullen boy of 12, had indeed attempted to disrupt her lessons, but a firm word and the promise of additional homework had tempered his rebellion, at least temporarily. By noon, as the children ran outside for their midday meal, Elizabeth felt cautiously optimistic. She unwrapped the sandwich Mrs. Wilson had packed for her and stepped onto the schoolhouse porch to enjoy the fresh air. The view from the schoolhouse overlooked rolling plains that stretched toward distant mountains, a landscape so different from Boston's crowded streets. Miss Carter. Elizabeth turned to see a young woman approaching, perhaps a few years older than herself, dressed in a practical brown dress with her blonde hair neatly pinned back. I'm Hannah Miller, the woman introduced herself. My younger siblings are in your class, the twins, Sarah and Samuel. Yes, of course, Elizabeth smiled, recalling the well-behaved 10-year-olds. They're very bright. They couldn't stop talking about you at breakfast, Hannah laughed. I run the dress shop in town. I thought I'd come introduce myself, since we women ought to stick together out here. I'd like that very much, Elizabeth admitted, realizing how lonely she'd felt despite Mrs. Wilson's motherly attentions. A few of us gather for sewing circle on Thursday evenings at the church. You'd be most welcome, Hannah offered, and don't worry about Hargrove and his ilk. Not everyone shares their narrow views. I'm beginning to see that, Elizabeth replied, grateful for another friendly face. Thank you, Hannah. As the weeks passed, Elizabeth settled into life in Silverstone Creek. Her students, with the exception of Tommy Hargrove and a few of his friends, responded well to her teaching methods. She joined Hannah's sewing circle and met other women of the town, many of whom had also come from somewhere else, following husbands, dreams, or necessity to this frontier community. Wade Dawson made a habit of riding past the schoolhouse each afternoon as classes dismissed, tipping his hat to her as children scattered toward home. Sometimes he would dismount and walk with her back toward town, their conversations growing easier with each encounter. She learned he had fought for the Union, that he had a younger sister in St. Louis, and that he could recite Shakespeare, a skill acquired from a schoolmaster father. He, in turn, discovered her passion for literature, her talent for sketching, and her determination to make Silverstone Creek her home despite its rough beginnings. You're nothing like I expected, Elizabeth Carter, he told her one evening as he escorted her back from a town meeting where she had eloquently argued for funds to purchase new books for the school. What did you expect? She asked, curious. Someone who'd take the first stagecoach back east after meeting Hargrove. His smile was warm in the fading light. Instead, you've won over half the town in a month. Only half, she teased, surprised by her own boldness. His eyes held hers for a moment too long. The other half just hasn't had the pleasure of knowing you yet. The autumn days grew shorter, and Elizabeth found herself looking forward to Wade's afternoon appearances with increasing anticipation. Sometimes he brought her wildflowers he'd found on his patrols. Other times, a book borrowed from Mr. Peterson's extensive library. Not everyone approved of their growing friendship. Elizabeth overheard whispers at the mercantile about the uppity Eastern teacher setting her cap for the marshal. Hargrove, still smarting from their first encounter, spread rumors that she was filling children's heads with dangerous ideas about equality and women's rights. Don't let them bother you, Hannah advised during their weekly sewing circle. They're just threatened by an educated woman who doesn't need their approval. I'm not sure it's that simple, Elizabeth sighed, her needle pausing in the quilt square she was working on. Mr. Hargrove seems determined to make my position here untenable. That's because his wife left him for a schoolteacher in Denver 2 years ago, Mrs. Wilson interjected, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Packed up and took their daughter with her, left him with just the boy. Elizabeth's eyes widened. I had no idea. Doesn't excuse his behavior, Hannah said firmly, but explains it somewhat. The conversation turned to planning the upcoming Harvest Festival, but Elizabeth's mind lingered on this new information. She found herself watching Tommy Hargrove more carefully the next day, noticing the patches on his clothes and the way he hoarded the extra biscuit she'd begun including in her lunch for him. After class, she asked him to stay behind. Tommy, I'd like to discuss your reading assignment. The boy slouched in his seat, defiance masking something more vulnerable. Ain't got time for extra work, Miss Carter. Pa needs help at home. Actually, she said gently, I thought you might enjoy this. She placed a well-worn copy of Treasure Island on his desk. It's about pirates and adventure. You can take your time with it. Suspicion clouded his features. Why are you giving me this? Elizabeth chose her words carefully. Because I think you're smarter than you let on, Tommy Hargrove, and sometimes books can take us places when we can't go ourselves. He stared at the book for a long moment before cautiously picking it up. Can I really take it home? Just bring it back when you're finished, she smiled. The boy tucked the book inside his jacket and scurried out. Elizabeth wasn't naive enough to think one book would solve Tommy's problems, but it was a start. She was locking up the schoolhouse when she heard a horse approaching. Wade dismounted, his expression serious. Afternoon, Elizabeth. Got word of trouble brewing. Thought I'd walk you back to town. Trouble? She asked, alarmed. Hargrove's been drinking since noon, running his mouth about the school board meeting tonight. Wade offered his arm, which she took. He's gathered some support among the ranchers who don't see the value in education beyond basic figures. The expansion proposal, Elizabeth realized. She had spent weeks preparing a presentation requesting funds to expand the school curriculum and possibly hire an assistant teacher for the growing number of students. He means to oppose it. Vocally, from what I hear. Wade's jaw tightened. I've asked Deputy Morris to keep an eye on him, but thought you should be prepared. As they walked toward town, Elizabeth's mind raced. Perhaps I should withdraw the proposal until tensions ease. Wade stopped, turning to face her. That's not like you, Elizabeth. Since when do you back down from what's right because it's difficult? Her cheeks warmed under his steady gaze. I don't want to cause more division in the town. The division was here before you arrived, he said firmly. You've brought light and learning. Don't let Hargrove extinguish that. The town hall was crowded when Elizabeth arrived that evening, the usual school board meeting having drawn an unusually large audience. She spotted Hargrove near the back, surrounded by several ranch hands and miners, all watching her with undisguised hostility. Mr. Peterson called the meeting to order, and the usual business proceeded until finally, Elizabeth was called to present her proposal. She approached the front with her carefully prepared notes, acutely aware of the mixed expressions around the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, honored citizens of Silverstone Creek, she began, steadying her voice. In the 4 months since I arrived, our school enrollment has increased by nearly 30%. A derisive snort from the back interrupted her. Hargrove stood, swaying slightly. Enrollment's up because she's forcing children to attend who should be working alongside their parents. Mr. Hargrove, please take your seat, Mr. Peterson ordered. Miss Carter has the floor. She's trying to turn this town into some Eastern finishing school, Hargrove continued, ignoring him. Teaching girls they don't need husbands and boys, they're too good for honest work. Elizabeth gripped the podium. That is absolutely untrue. I teach all my students the value of hard work and practical skills. I simply believe they deserve the opportunity to learn more if they choose. My boy comes home with his head full of nonsense about college, Hargrove shouted, his face reddening. What's wrong with him following his father's trade? Nothing whatsoever, Elizabeth replied calmly. But Tommy shows exceptional aptitude for mathematics and science. He could become an engineer, perhaps even help design the railroad expansions that bring prosperity to towns like ours. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. Wade, standing near the door in his official capacity, caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. Tommy belongs here, not in some fancy school back east, Hargrove insisted, but some of the fire had left his argument. Mr. Hargrove, Elizabeth said, softening her tone, I understand your concern for your son's future, but don't all our children deserve choices? The world is changing rapidly. The skills that served our generation may not be sufficient for theirs. As Elizabeth resumed her presentation, outlining the specific improvements she proposed and their modest costs, she noticed several of Hargrove's supporters nodding thoughtfully. By the time she finished, the mood in the room had shifted. The board voted to approve her proposal with only 2 dissenting votes. As people filed out of the town hall, Elizabeth found herself surrounded by well-wishers and parents expressing support. Wade kept a watchful eye on Hargrove, who stormed out without further confrontation. You were magnificent, Hannah whispered, squeezing her arm. Did you see old Mr. Greeley's face when you mentioned preparing students for business opportunities? I think you just secured his donation for those new books. Elizabeth laughed, relief and excitement mingling. I was terrified the entire time. Couldn't tell, Wade said, approaching them after most of the crowd had dispersed. You spoke with the conviction of someone who believes in what they're fighting for. Thank you for encouraging me not to withdraw the proposal, Elizabeth said. You were right. I usually am, he replied with a wink that made her heart skip. May I escort you back to the hotel? It's getting dark. Hannah exchanged a knowing look with Mrs. Wilson, who had lingered nearby. Don't keep her out too late, Marshal. She has young minds to shape in the morning. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter as they walked slowly through the main street, now quieter as businesses closed for the evening. Stars emerged in a sky vaster than any Elizabeth had known in Boston. I'm proud of you, Wade said after a comfortable silence. Not many would stand their ground the way you did tonight. I've discovered I'm stronger than I thought, Elizabeth admitted. Coming west has changed me, for the better, I'd say. They paused outside the hotel, neither seeming eager to end the evening. Wade, Elizabeth began hesitantly, may I ask you something rather forward? His eyes, illuminated by the hotel's porch lantern, regarded her with warmth. You can ask me anything. Why do you make a point of walking me home nearly every day? Surely the marshal has more important duties. A smile played at his lips. Is that truly a mystery to you, Elizabeth? Her pulse quickened. I'd like to hear you say it. Wade took a step closer, his voice lowering. Because every day I don't see you feels incomplete. Because your courage and conviction remind me why I chose to wear this badge. Because from the moment you stood your ground against Hargrove on your first day here, I knew you were someone exceptional. Elizabeth's breath caught. People talk, about us. Let them, he said simply. I've never much cared for gossip. Nor have I, she replied, finding boldness in his honesty, but I do care about your good opinion. You have far more than that, Elizabeth Carter. His hand gently brushed hers. You have my admiration, my respect, and if you'll permit it, my affection as well. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in the pool of lantern light. I would permit it gladly, she whispered. Wade's expression softened as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then perhaps you'll also permit me to call on you properly. Sunday dinner after church? I'd like that very much. Elizabeth smiled, her heart light with possibility. Winter descended on Silverstone Creek with unexpected ferocity that year. Heavy snows blanketed the town by early December, making travel difficult but bringing the community closer together. Elizabeth continued teaching, though attendance fluctuated with the weather. On the worst days, she taught whoever could safely reach the schoolhouse, combining lessons across ages and having older students help the younger ones. Wade called on her regularly, Sunday dinners extending to Saturday walks and Wednesday evening reading sessions in the hotel's small parlor. Their courtship, conducted under Mrs. Wilson's approving but vigilant eye, became a fixture of town life. "You've tamed our Marshal," Hannah teased one afternoon as Elizabeth stopped by the dress shop. "Never thought I'd see Wade Dawson carrying books and picking wildflowers." "He was always that man," Elizabeth replied, running her fingers over a bolt of pretty blue fabric. "He just needed someone to appreciate those qualities." Tommy Hargrove had returned Treasure Island and asked for another book, beginning a cautious truce between Elizabeth and the boy. His father maintained his distance, but had ceased his public opposition to her teaching methods, especially after Tommy's arithmetic skills had helped him renegotiate terms with cattle buyers. As Christmas approached, the town organized a holiday pageant at the school. Elizabeth worked tirelessly with her students, preparing recitations and carols. Wade helped construct a simple stage, working evenings after his rounds. "You're good with your hands," Elizabeth observed as he fitted the last pieces together. The school was empty except for them, the children having been dismissed early due to threatening weather. "Years of ranch work before I took up the badge," he explained, wiping his brow. "My father believed in the value of both books and practical skills." "A wise man," Elizabeth smiled, handing him a cup of coffee she'd prepared on the small stove. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a now familiar spark passing between them. Wade set down the cup and reached for her hand. "Elizabeth, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes," the schoolhouse door banged open, interrupting the moment. Deputy Morris stood there, snow covering his hat and shoulders. "Marshal, there's trouble. Stage got stranded in the pass. Driver made it to the Wilson Ranch on foot. Says there's passengers still with the coach, including a woman and child." Wade was immediately alert. "How long ago?" "Hour, maybe less. Says the snow's getting worse." "Organize a rescue party," Wade instructed, already reaching for his coat. "We'll need at least 4 men, horses, blankets, provisions." Elizabeth grabbed her own coat. "I'm coming too. If there's a child involved, they may need care." "Elizabeth, it's dangerous," Wade began. "I grew up in Boston winters," she reminded him, "and you'll need every able hand." "I can ride, and I have medical knowledge from helping my father." There was no time to argue. Within 30 minutes, a rescue party of 6, including Elizabeth, Wade, Deputy Morris, and 3 volunteers, set out toward the mountain pass. The snow fell thicker as they left town, visibility decreasing with each mile. The stagecoach was where the driver had left it, tilted precariously where a wheel had broken through a snowdrift hiding a ditch. Inside were a middle-aged salesman, a young mother clutching her feverish 4-year-old daughter, and an elderly gentleman who had injured his hip in the accident. Elizabeth immediately went to the child, checking her temperature while Wade and the others worked to free the stage and transfer the passengers to horses. "She's burning up," the mother said, her voice tight with worry. "We were taking her to the doctor in Silverstone." "We'll get her there," Elizabeth promised, wrapping the child in an extra blanket she'd brought. "What's her name?" "Lucy," the woman replied. "I'm Margaret Jenkins. My husband's the new telegraph operator in Silverstone. He sent for us from Denver. You're Mrs. Jenkins." "Your husband's been so worried," Elizabeth exclaimed. "He's prepared a lovely home for you." The journey back to town was arduous. Elizabeth rode with little Lucy secured against her chest, the child's mother riding double with Deputy Morris. The elderly man, Mr. Griffith, was secured to Wade's horse, while the salesman managed his own mount. By the time they reached Silverstone, the blizzard was in full force. They went directly to Dr. Simmons's office, where Elizabeth helped tend to Lucy while the doctor examined Mr. Griffith's injury. "You may have saved this child's life," Dr. Simmons told Elizabeth as Lucy's fever finally began to break after several anxious hours. "Getting her out of that cold stage when you did." Mr. Jenkins arrived, tearfully reuniting with his wife and daughter. "How can I ever thank you?" he asked Wade and Elizabeth. Just doing our duty, Wade replied, his eyes never leaving Elizabeth's face. The pride in his expression warmed her more than the fire blazing in the doctor's stove. The storm raged for 3 days, making Christmas Eve the first opportunity for the town to gather for Elizabeth's planned pageant. Despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, attendance was exceptional. Parents crowded into the schoolhouse to watch their children perform, their faces glowing with pride. Tommy Hargrove, cast as the innkeeper in the nativity scene, delivered his lines flawlessly. To Elizabeth's surprise, his father sat in the back row, his expression inscrutable but present nonetheless. After the final carol, as families mingled and enjoyed the refreshments provided by the Ladies' Aid Society, Wade approached Elizabeth. "That question I was about to ask before we were interrupted," he said quietly, leading her to a quiet corner. "I think it's time I finished it." Elizabeth's heart raced as he took both her hands in his. "Elizabeth Carter, you came to Silverstone Creek and transformed it with your courage and conviction. You've taught our children, stood up to our bullies, and shown me what it means to fight for what matters." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring with a modest diamond. "I find myself hoping you might consider making this your permanent home as my wife." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Wade Dawson, are you proposing to me in a schoolhouse on Christmas Eve?" It seemed fitting, he smiled. "This is where you work your magic, after all." "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, applause erupted around them. They turned to find the entire room watching, Mrs. Wilson dabbing at her eyes while Hannah beamed beside her. Even Hargrove gave a grudging nod from the back of the room. "I think our secret's out," Wade laughed, his arm encircling her waist. "It was never much of a secret," Elizabeth replied, leaning into him. "Not in a town this size. They were married in the spring when wildflowers carpeted the plains surrounding Silverstone Creek." Elizabeth continued teaching, though she moved from the hotel to the small but comfortable house Wade had been renovating throughout the winter. Together, they became fixtures of the growing community, the respected Marshal and his educator wife. 2 years later, as Elizabeth rocked their infant daughter in the parlor while Wade read aloud from A Tale of Two Cities, a knock came at their door. Wade answered it to find Tommy Hargrove, now 14 and considerably taller, standing awkwardly on their porch. "Evening, Marshal," the boy said, hat in hand. "Is Mrs. Dawson available?" Elizabeth joined them at the door, the baby cradled against her shoulder. "Tommy, what brings you here so late?" The boy shifted nervously. "Got something to show you, madam." He withdrew a letter from his pocket. "It's from that school in Denver you told me about, the one with the special mathematics program." Wade and Elizabeth exchanged glances as Tommy unfolded the letter. "They're offering me a scholarship," he announced, his voice cracking with emotion. "Said my entrance examination was the highest score they'd seen in 3 years. "Tommy, that's wonderful," Elizabeth exclaimed. "It was my pa's idea," the boy added, surprising them both. "He saw what I was reading, asked me about it. Said he didn't want me ending up like him, stuck in one place because I never had choices." "Your father suggested this?" Wade asked, unable to hide his astonishment. Tommy nodded. "Said sometimes a man has to admit when he's been wrong about something, or someone." He looked meaningfully at Elizabeth. Elizabeth felt Wade's arm tighten around her waist. "Please tell your father we'd be honored if you both joined us for dinner this Sunday," she said. "We can celebrate your achievement and discuss the details of this opportunity." As Tommy hurried home, bursting with news and possibilities, Wade closed the door and turned to his wife. "You've changed this town, Elizabeth Dawson, one stubborn heart at a time." "We've changed it together," she corrected him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "And we're just getting started." Outside their window, Silverstone Creek stretched toward the mountains. No longer the hostile frontier that had greeted Elizabeth with spite and suspicion, but a home built on respect, education, and love, a future as boundless as the western sky.